So now let's talk about something a little more complex, peptide hormones. Well, what's a peptide? Well, here we have an amino acid, and what we have here are two amino acids being linked together. Now, this is what we call a dehydration synthesis action reaction because you're synthesizing a new bond between these two amino acids, and now you have water involved. So these peptide bonds, this is what you have when you link these two amino acids together to form a polypeptide that eventually makes a protein. So it's between a carboxyl and amino group. So the carboxyl refers to this grouping right here. So all amino acids, they have this carbon and the two oxygens and the hydrogen right here linked in this formation. That's why they call it a group. It's something you find repeated in many different types of chemicals, organic chemicals. And the amino group refers to this part right here. So basically you have at the end a carbon bound to a nitrogen. So what do you call a longer polymer of amino acids? Well, when you have many peptides, well, what you have here is a polypeptide. When you have all these long string of amino acids linked by peptide bonds and daisy chaining from the carbon to the nitrogen and having multiple peptide bonds, that's what you call a polypeptide. So again, there are 20, and for this class, just know there are 20. I think selenocysteine and the weird archaeobacteria ones that we don't find in humans, don't worry about for this class. But 20 different amino acids so what we have here are two amino acids. We link them with a peptide bond. But if you have many amino acids linked with peptide bonds, that's what we call a polypeptide. So those peptide hormones, those protein hormones, they all have this involved in some extent. Sometimes hormones can be made from multiple polypeptides or polypeptides with other things added to it, or polypeptides that are chopped up different ways, but they all have this initial synthesis involved at one point. So they're all some daisy chain of amino acids linked via peptide bonds at one point. Now, peptide hormones, again, chains of amino acids, and these are stored in vesicles for later secretion. If you don't know what a cellular vesicle is, again, chapter 3, look at cell anatomy. But these are little bubbles within the cell that can contain all these chemicals, in this case, peptide hormones. Now here we have a peptide. So all these little beads right here, these are amino acids, and they're all being linked via peptide bonds. We're not showing individual peptide bonds, but we have one long chain. Now this is what we call proinsulin. And you might be like, hey, that sounds familiar. That sounds like insulin. But it's not the same thing as insulin. The actual insulin you think about, like when you with people who suffer from diabetes mellitus, that is a little different, and it's made from this. But proinsulin is actually what we call a precursor. So it's something that it's starting material for a final product. Now the actual insulin you're thinking about when you think about insulin, what you do is actually chop off a big part of that polypeptide. So now it looks like it's two different polypeptides, but it actually came from the same initial polypeptide. It's just that you link it via all these sulfur, what we call a disulfide bond. So there's two sulfurs, and these kind of help to fold it and make the arrangement and structure of insulin. But to actually have the active insulin, your body needs to cut off that excess polypeptide and amino acids and make the final product. This is what your insulin is actually look like, or actually in that cartoon. All right, so peptide hormones, these are the largest group of hormones. Do I expect you to know every single peptide hormone? No. But you should know general properties and how they're made in terms of okay, they're all made from amino acids and polypeptide synthesis, and includes all the hormones from the pituitary gland. Will cover the pituitary gland very soon. So all the pituitary gland hormones, these are they at the very backbone of these hormones, they're a polypeptide. And it includes all glycoproteins. So whenever you see this prefix or root word glyco, it refers to sugars and carbohydrates, but they're still proteins at their core. So they start off proteins, but now they're starting to attach all these sugar molecules to it. So here we have our insulin, and what do these three images have in common? They are all insulin, but they look very different, right? So what we have here is like remember that organic chemistry we saw with the tryptophan, but now we're seeing all the carbons and all the nitrogens and oxygens. So this is insulin, but now we're looking at very detailed magnification. But this is also insulin. This alpha chain right here, now we're seeing the 3D structure. So for peptide hormones, there are many different ways of seeing, diagramming, and depicting them. So it's like if you Google, show me a picture of hair, well, someone might show you a picture. If they want to be really specific, they might show a very high magnification, like this electron microscope here. Is this hair? Yeah, but just way too much detail. Here, is this hair? Yeah, that's hair, but it's like more simple. And is this hair right here? Yeah, it's a 3D structure of hair. So again, peptide hormones, depending on the complexity, you might see different ways of depicting it in scientific images and other textbooks. Now, this is what I'm kind of getting at here. I want you to be, now I'm not going to expect you to draw out this entire structure or draw the structure of tyrosine and tryptophan or any of the chemical structures of the hormones. But I want you to be able to recognize at a glance what these hormones look like. So peptide hormones, some sort of long chain, or if you see a 3D structure like this, it's probably depicting a peptide hormone. So again, they're all insulin, just different ways of looking at it. But what do they have in common in all insulin? A long chain of amino acids linked together via peptide bonds.